This world before the creation of heaven and earth was a sea and an island, embodying the blessings of the goddess ruling in those lands, Santnar. A place where, in accordance with the principles of bella figura, Italian philosophy of striving for beauty, beauty and grace were in the air, penetrating everywhere. A place that sparkled with luxury and hedonism every night like a bright star. The air was filled with the scent of carefree fun and entertainment. However, even in such a world there was at least one garbage pit in which all the dirt was collected. Fast forward to the Camorra slums. The sound of breaking glass cut through the silence of the night. Loud screams echoed off the dirty walls. There was no room for luxury here, only survival. Someone was rudely called a little rat. Dark silhouettes surrounded the cornered victim. They screamed so that there would be no thought of escaping again. They were already aware of everything. The gloomy man brought his face, distorted with anger, closer to the young guy. He made a claim to Abel that in fact he was not mute. And what's more, the man grabbed the young man's shirt tightly. He pulled it with force, revealing his body, with a woman's breasts tied up in white fabric. The victim screamed in horror, demanded that they leave her alone. The surrounding men laughed rudely. It turned out that everything was true. This scoundrel was a woman. The attacker's eyes were burning with greedy fire. They decided to take a closer look at the victim. Her face, of course, was vomit. Well, the body. The thin figure in the cap waved his hand sharply. There was a shout and demands for them to get out. Someone howled in pain. The victim had a sharp piece of a broken bottle in her hands. The edge was stained with blood. The girls shouted threateningly that they shouldn't even think about coming closer. She was not allowed to finish. One of the attackers grabbed the victim painfully by the shoulders. The unfortunate woman winced from unbearable pain. Farzila shouted that he felt sorry for the orphan and took her in. But there was no gratitude from this bitch. He shook the girl with all his might. The bottle fragment fell from her hands. The man felt sorry for her, who could only support herself by cleaning shoes. And he thought about forgetting about everything. But he decided not to. The man's elbow slammed into the skinny body with force. The blow took the victim's breath away. A muffled and stifled scream echoed in the dark alley. Farzila said he was giving her a week. He peered intently at the unfortunate victim. If she couldn't get their patronage back, she'd have to deal with men instead of shoes. A nasty giggle was heard. A few days later, San Celina Square. A shoe shiner leaned over his customer's shoes. His rhythmic movements added rhythm to the music of the city. The girl worked hard, but sad thoughts did not leave her head. She wondered what to do. She had less than 2 days left. The cleaner's movements were precise and quick. Her thoughts were rushing between the rag and her empty pocket. She had to find the money at any cost. She was worried that if she could be sent to some brothel after all. She angrily clutched the dirty rag in her hands. She thought that it would be better if she... The girl didn't have time to finish her thought. She heard her client echoing her thoughts. He was reading a newspaper. Said that it would have been better for him to die. The man put the press aside, admitted that it would be much better than taking Lucretia's hand, and entering the ceremonial hall. The girl raised her dirty, ugly face to the client. She looked at him intently. Surprise and recognition were visible in her eyes. This couldn't be. Could this incredibly handsome man with jet-black hair really be Cesare Bonaparte? There was an article in the Santnar Herald about the brightest star of the Santnar nobility. It said that the protagonist of countless love scandals, Cesare Bonaparte, had finally met his destiny. It turned out to be the youngest daughter of the Della Valle family, Lucrezia Della Valle, who attracted public attention by choosing Cesare as her husband. The young man was the only heir of Bonaparte. The bride referred to the marriage contract. It was drawn up by 2 families in the distant past. The entire beau monde congratulated Lucretia on the fact that her long-standing unrequited love had borne fruit. The man's fingers crumpled the newspaper in fury. The young man noted that Lucretia was an excellent liar. His eyes blazed with anger. The men were sitting in the square and talking. One of them was having his shoes polished. Cesare doubted that it was fate, even though he knew what kind of woman she was. The girl stared at her client with wide eyes. A drop of sweat rolled down her temple. The girl understood that she was definitely not mistaken. This was Cesare Bonaparte. Who would have thought that she would meet such a big shot in the Plaza San Salina? She was wondering what she should do. Maybe she should explain her situation and ask for help. The girl continued to sit on her knees in front of the men. She hoped that maybe he would take pity on her and throw her a couple of gold coins. Cesare lit a match to the tip of his cigar. A soft crackling sound was heard. The aromatic smoke filled his lungs. He was silent for a moment. He noted that he would still have to act according to the plan. The interlocutor screamed in horror. Could the brunette really be talking about that crazy plan? He wasn't serious. Cesare asked if his friend might have a better idea. He suggested finding a decent girl and selling her to Della Valle. The shoeshine girl froze when she heard these words. She felt like her heart was going to jump out of her chest. This wasn't just an opportunity to sort things out with a few gold coins. Perhaps this was the last chance given to the unfortunate girl by the goddess herself. She gathered her courage. She looked up at the men. She put her hand to her chest and asked to sell it. She promised that she would become the most expensive lady in Sant'Nara. The client looked at the girl intently. The sunlight played on the handsome young man's tense face as the cigar slowly smoldered in his hand. His interlocutor reacted faster. He leaned slightly towards the girl and asked what the miss was talking about. Cesare snorted contemptuously. Have shoeshiners forgotten how to judge people's class by their shoes these days? He told Miss Shine that he was no pimp. The girl clutched the cloth in her hands. She admitted that she had identified everything correctly. Her name was Abel. Then she corrected herself and introduced herself. Her name was Adele Vivi. She noted that she only wanted to say that she could play the role that the gentleman needed better than anyone else. The brunette leaned forward. He asked where such confidence in understanding his goals came from. There was slight interest in his eyes. The girl noticed that he needed a false daughter of the Bonaparte family, whom he could send to the Della Valle family in his place. The yellow eyes fixed their gaze on the girl. Cesare demanded an answer. He wondered who the cleaner had heard this from. Adele admitted that she had come to this conclusion after reading the newspaper. In the marriage contract made public by Delaville, only their families were mentioned. However, no specific names were given. Therefore, the brunette probably thought that he could free himself from the bonds of a political marriage. This could have happened if it had been possible to deceive everyone by buying a girl and calling her the secret daughter of the Bonaparte family. Adele continued that a girl was definitely needed, since there was still one unmarried son left in the Della Valle family. Cesare's interlocutor was delighted. Could the girl have guessed everything just by reading the newspaper? It was incredible. The brunette cut Jude off abruptly. He told his interlocutor that they had wasted their time. The Della Valle family has always produced great scientists. It was impossible to fool them so easily by selling them a shoeshiner who could barely read. Adele wondered if she wasn't barely able to read. The brunette froze in surprise. The aromatic smoke of the cigar swirled in the air. Jude turned his head to his friend in delight. Could the girl really have spoken the language of Dinan? Adele confirmed. She also knew the language of Algice. The brunette asked how she managed to learn foreign languages. The girl answered that she read books in the public library and listened to foreigners speak. Cesare nodded and laughed. He couldn't believe that she had listened briefly. It felt as if a sea goddess was making fun of him. The man looked at the girl. He addressed Miss Adele Vivi by her full name. No matter how smart she was. The man paused. The polished toe of his shoe touched the girl's face. Didn't she understand that the first thing a product for sale should look attractive? Cesare said that the girl was disqualified. Both men rose from the bench. The friends passed by the cleaner, who remained kneeling. Their steps moved away from the unfortunate. Adele's unexpected cry made the men stop. The girl asked them to wait. Her cap flew into the sky with a loud whistle. Her long hair immediately fell over her shoulders. She cleaned her face with ragged, hurried movements. Both men stood there, confused and surprised. They didn't understand what was happening before their eyes. After a while, they saw the girl. Long curls framed her pale face. Adele asked if they still intended to disqualify her. The men turned and walked towards the girl. Jude admitted that when the brunette suggested pretending to be with Cesare's sister, he thought it was complete nonsense. But when I looked closer, I noticed that both their hair and eye color were quite similar. I asked my friend, wasn't that just perfect? The brunette asked if Adele was by any chance a noblewoman. Who were her parents? The girl was surprised. What kind of parents could one ask an orphan about? The brunette thought about it. He covered his mouth with his hand. In that case, he really was curious. I noticed that it didn't seem like Adele was a simple fool who didn't realize that if she was found out, she would be killed. I asked her why she needed it then. The girl was embarrassed. She didn't know how to answer. She admitted that she was just hungry. The young man thought about it. Well, whatever, fine. He agreed. The man took a few steps, moved away from Adele, said the phrase, I, Cesare, am sending you away. The girl continued, let's meet again in the place where we live together. The man turned and looked intently at the cleaner. Cesare exhaled. A grin played on the brunette's lips. He admired her. She even recognized the quote from Dante's play. It seems he has found a very useful woman. He suggested coming to Bonaparte's estate before noon tomorrow. The old wooden shacks hunched under the weight of the rain, their dark silhouettes lost in the night as the drops pounded the rooftops of the city. Rain pounded the window of the building where the lonely figure stood frozen in stupor. Cold drops trickled down the dirty glass. She still couldn't believe it. Adele sat on the floor of her squalid dwelling. Cesare Bonaparte had accepted her offer. She would no longer have to worry about the brothel. A young girl appeared in the brunette's memory. They lived together in this shabby room. It was a great pity, but she could not tell Clarisse, her only friend, anything. The girl wanted to share it with her at first, but apparently she was busy today too. Adele decided to leave her a letter. An unexpected sharp jerk of the door brought the girl out of her thoughtful state. She raised her head in fear. She froze, listening. She began to carefully rise from the floor. The door continued to be pulled. The girl did not understand who could come at such an hour. Beads of sweat appeared on her face. The door swung open with a deafening crash. The silhouette of a man appeared in the doorway. Old man Nino's eyes flashed angrily. He said that he knew it would be like this. He admitted that he had come to check, and the girl was already preparing to run away without having paid them for their patronage. Adele backed away in fear. The man held the victim's hand in a death grip. He pulled her along. He said that he would... The girl desperately struggled. She screamed for him to let her go. She tried to hit the attacker. Adele broke free and ran to the window. The big guy called her a sick bitch. He ordered her to come to him quickly. The girl climbed onto the table. The man rushed towards her. Where was she going to run? The big guy was reaching out his hands to the girl. He was trying to grab her. His face was disfigured and twisted with anger. Adele remembered how the brunette asked her, since she knew that if she was exposed she would be killed, then why did she need all this? The girl pushed herself away from the table and climbed out the window. She no longer cared if she died. The brunette would be incredibly happy if she could escape from here. The dull sound of a blow echoed through the deserted street. The frail body lay sprawled on the wet pavement, the rain pounding the motionless figure mercilessly. Suddenly the girl moved. With difficulty she began to rise. Each movement was accompanied by groans. Adele found the strength to get up and move forward. If it was possible, she would be only too happy to risk her life for it. A gray-haired, elegant man greeted Madame Adele with a bow. His name was Ernst. He was the butler at the Bonaparte estate. The estate looked luxurious and rich. Ernest opened the forged gates for the girl, invited her to come in, said that the head of the family was expecting her. Drops of water fell on the parquet floor. Cesare was writing something, sitting at the table. He seemed not to notice the wet figure in his luxurious office. Suddenly he looked up. He noticed that the girl looked pretty bad. Adele was standing there wet from head to toe. The brunette turned to his beloved little sister and asked how it happened that she got so wet. Cesare laughed mockingly, looking at the young lady standing before him. He offered to share the information with his older brother. Adele told about Mr. Nino, an old man who ran a bunch of shoeshiners in Camorra. He was stalking the girl because of overdue patronage payments. This man would definitely not stop pestering her. The brunette thought about that old man, said that he was now dead. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She stared at her interlocutor in bewilderment. The man looked out the window. He noticed that it was raining terribly today. He asked if the girl agreed with him, as he heard the rain was so heavy that one of the shacks in Camorra could not withstand it and collapsed. He noted that death due to accidents in the slums is quite common. The brunette looked at the girl. He asked if there was another bug that could interfere with them. Adele shuddered at these words. She answered negatively. She said there was no one else. Their eyes met. The brunette asked if he should just give up on it. The girl's thoughts began to race in fear. What was he talking about? It seemed like the brunette was talking as if he knew about Clarisse. Adele clenched her fists. The brunette asked her not to worry so much. After all, the girl had nothing to worry about until the plan went wrong. Since the matter was settled, the brunette suggested moving on to the main thing. He said that the girl already knew the goal. She needed to seduce the son of the Della Valle people and marry him. The brunette made a demand, starting with her body and mind, the way she spoke, and ending with the tips of her fingers and toes. The girl had to become the ideal Bonaparte, to fool the entire Fornati society. The brunette struck a match on the box. A fire appeared. The young man lit a cigar. He noticed that there were 3 months of preparation ahead. If she couldn't become the lady he recognized in that time, her plan would go to the trash. The man's hand dropped the match. The girl watched the falling match tensely. She thought about the trash heap. If the plan really did fail, would she go to the trash heap after him? Adele was tensely silent. After a while, she quietly replied that she understood the gentleman. The man's hand lay on the sheets of paper covered with writing. The brunette wondered if the girl wouldn't even ask why the deadline was 3 months. Adele replied that the brunette had planned to time the event to coincide with his birthday party. The man agreed with her statement. Cesare approached the girl, exhaled aromatic smoke, said that after all she had a talent for revealing his plans based on newspaper articles alone. He looked closely at his interlocutor. The man had the feeling that she knew even more about his family than he did. With a casual movement of his hand, he took the girl by the chin and raised her head. He said that there must be another reason for this. A self-confident smile played on his lips. He did not let go of her face, holding it in his hand. He asked if perhaps Adele was interested in him. The crackling of the many candles in the chandeliers under the ceiling broke the silence that hung in the room after Cesare's question. The brunette understood Adele's feelings completely. For a country bumpkin from the slums who only had a face, her newfound brother seemed almost like a messiah. The young man held the girl's face in his palm. He claimed that he was the brother she wanted to cling to. He leaned closer, and with a sly smile on his lips warned that he did not want to see her in his bedroom in the middle of the night. The girl boldly replied that she was grateful for the advice. She admitted that, whatever the case, she was not interested in it. The girl's amber eyes looked attentively at her interlocutor. Although he was handsome, he seemed a little crazy. The brunette laughed merrily. He noticed that Adele's expression was just something. The man turned around and walked away from the girl. He warned her because something like this had happened before. The brunette told the gentleman that she would keep that in mind. Cesare looked over his shoulder at his interlocutor. He declared that he was not her master. Now she must call him brother. The brunette looked at the young man. He plopped down in a luxurious carved chair. The girl stood in the middle of the room. She agreed to call him brother. The cigar smoked in the young gentleman's hand. He praised the brunette, called her little sister, declared that from that moment on she became Adelaide Bonaparte. According to legend, the girl was 5 years younger than Cesare. All this time she lived in distant Capolo somewhere overseas. Adelaide considered herself a commoner. And suddenly, for some reason, she decided to come here alone. Adele thought about it. So when explaining the reason why she became Bonaparte, she had to adapt to the situation. Was that really his plan? The brunette asked whether the young man intended to let the chairwoman in on their plans. I thought that without his grandmother's consent, it would have been impossible to even begin planning something like this. The brunette answered in the negative. His dear Mistress Eva was so eager to see her grandchildren that she was ready to receive Lucretia with open arms. The girl did not look up. As it turned out, the chairwoman supported this marriage. Cesare asked if there was really nothing else that interested her. In his opinion, the most important thing had been ignored. The girl asked what he meant. The brunette was talking about his parents. Since she was going to pretend to be his sister, shouldn't she find out about this? He asked why she hadn't asked about it. The girl looked up at her interlocutor. I was surprised by this question. Is there really a single person in Santnar who doesn't know? Rumors were circulating that Cesare's parents, mad with love for each other, had run away. They had abandoned their families and their little child. The brunette only heard that in the year when the gentleman turned 9, they moved. Cesare chuckled. So she didn't need any further explanation. They would say that her parents had gone mad a second time and given birth to her. That was the end of it. The young man told Adele that the maid was waiting for her outside the door. The girl simply had to follow her. The creak of an opening door was heard. The brunette let the girl go ahead. He called her by a new name, Adelaide Bonaparte. The young man would very much like to believe that at their next meeting, Adele would be able to demonstrate a more ladylike image. A wicked smile appeared on Cesare's face. He was impatiently waiting for more progress in her changes. The young lady looked her interlocutor in the eye with courage. She promised her brother that she would make every effort. Effie Carer, the appointed maid, bowed slightly and admitted to Lady Adelaide that it was an honor to serve her. 2 female figures stood frozen at the entrance to a spacious room. The maid noted that this room now belonged to her mistress. Effie said that the Bonapartes rejected luxury, so the decor cannot be called chic. There were many beautiful and expensive trinkets on the tables and shelves. The maid assured that the lady would not feel uncomfortable here anyway, although the woman thought it was too modest for a lady's chambers. The brunette walked behind Effie. She was surprised how everything around could be called modest. The maid asked to address her freely. The young lady was embarrassed. She did not know what to answer. Effie said that the lady would start etiquette classes tomorrow. If the girl caught a cold due to hypothermia, it would be a big problem. The woman walked forward and extended her hand, indicating that they should go into another room. The luxurious bathroom amazed the brunette. The maid said that she would help her take a bath. The girl was embarrassed. She nervously fiddled with the edge of her dirty and wet clothes. She assured him that everything was fine. She would be able to wash herself. Effie looked at the lady sternly. Nobles did not take baths on their own. It was also part of the training. She asked to follow the rules. The young lady felt awkward. Miss Carrer said that all her words directed towards the lady were not a request. The girl made an effort, agreed, thanked the woman, started to slowly take off her clothes. The dirty, wet rags fell in a pile near the girl's bare feet. The maid shuddered at what she saw. Her eyes widened. Effie screamed. Her entire body was covered in horrible bruises and contusions. Adele cried out that her bruises would quickly disappear. She was sure of it because she had been beaten often. But no blemishes remained. The brunette covered herself with her hands in shame. Without looking the maid in the eye, she asked if she would report this. The girl was incredibly scared. What if Cesare found her body ugly and broke the contract? The maid was silent for a long time. The woman looked closely at the girl's beaten figure. The contract between the brunette and the young master Cesare will be able to end immediately after the wedding with Della Valle's son. Until that moment, all that was required of Adele was to not be discovered by the young master of their clan. The brunette did not raise her eyes. After these words, she exhaled with relief. She thanked the goddess. Effie noticed that even if the young lady's wounds healed, she had lost too much weight. Right now, she had to focus on restoring her health. Rose petals fell from the maid's hands into the bath bowl. They slowly floated on the surface of the water. The woman decided to repeat once again that the brunette was now a lady of the Bonaparte family. Cesare wondered what the maid could say about his charming little sister. The man was sitting at the table in the study. A rainstorm was raging outside the window. The woman admitted that her health left much to be desired. There were numerous traces of beatings on her body. The man thought for a moment. He pointedly noted that the chipped pearl was practically worthless. Effie noted that these were injuries that could be completely healed with treatment. And when the lady gains a little weight, her beauty could outshine many. The brunette chuckled thoughtfully. He remembered how he held the girl's face in his hands. He admitted that she was still beautiful. A lewd smile played on his face. He now felt sorry that they were now relatives. The maid shuddered. She was outraged by the behavior of the master. The man smiled with white teeth. He calmed the woman down. He told her not to worry. He would not touch the girl. A clap of thunder rumbled outside the windows. The young man didn't say it out loud, but he was sure that Adele would die anyway as soon as his problem was solved. In the pre-dawn twilight, the Bonaparte estate towered as a dark mass. The park laid out in front of the estate was drowning in a thick bluish haze. The brunette woke up again out of old habit. The girl looked thoughtfully out the window, watched the ships return with their catch. Usually, it was at this time that the fishing boats that had been working all night would enter the harbor. Soon some fishermen will start distributing fish they couldn't sell to those in need. The girl herself woke up every day at dawn, wandering around the pier in the hope of making it in time for the distribution. Now her life had become so luxurious that she couldn't even believe it. Adelaide was worried. She muttered quietly to herself, wondering if she would be able to cope with everything with dignity. Her fingers reached for the book. The weighty volume appeared in her hands. The girl didn't think she would be able to fall asleep again. Sunlight fell on the snow-white sheets. The brunette was sitting in bed leaning over a book. The silence was broken only by the rustle of turning pages. Suddenly there was a soft knock at the door. Effie entered the room. She noticed that the lady was already awake. The woman came closer and asked if the sleeping place was not suitable for her. The girl did not agree. She simply woke up quite early. The brunette put the book aside and asked the maid what she would have to do now. Effie closed her eyes. She noticed that the girl was full of enthusiasm. From today on, there would not be a single free hour in the lady's schedule. However, she suggested starting the meal. The table was covered with all sorts of delicacies. The girl looked at all this splendor in fear. There was panic in her eyes. The maid moved the chair. She suggested that they sit down. She asked if the girl had any special food preferences. Adelaide said she wasn't a big fan of rotten food, but anything would do. She could even eat insects. Effie noted that there was no preference at all. She considered this a good quality for a noble lady. The woman watched the brunette from the side. She noted that table etiquette was one of the mandatory skills for nobles. Adelaide nodded in response. Effie said it was the basics. Always use the outermost utensils when starting a meal. The woman pointed to them. It was necessary to maintain posture. Chin raised higher. Elbows should not touch the tabletop. During the meal, it is not allowed to keep hands under the table. Adelaide deftly wielded a knife and fork. The maid praised the brunette. She said that she did a great job. She continued the lesson. Now she asked to try the dish. The girl put a small piece on a fork. She put it in her mouth. Her face turned red. The variety of dishes was astounding. There was beef carpaccio with arugula and celery, linguine with mackerel and abalone, halibut with potato gratin and tomato sauce. The brunette chewed with pleasure. She even closed her eyes from pleasure. Each dish was magnificent. The brunette was even ready to lick the plates. Suddenly the young lady shuddered. She wondered if she had been eating too greedily, like a tramp. Effie watched the girl. She said she was very pleased to see that her mistress had a good appetite. She noted that for some time she should have eaten more than 4 times a day. The girl looked at her in surprise. The maid continued that a noble lady should be in a body. Adelaide was pleased with this statement. The clicking of heels echoed throughout the room. Effie walked ahead of the young lady. She explained that it was now time to give her a tour of the mansion. The estate was striking in its luxury and scale. There was a library and a reception room, an art gallery, a billiard room, a refectory. The maid said that the young master's office was located in the central area of the first floor. If for some reason Lady Adelaide needs to visit the young gentleman, she must enter without knocking. This is the rule of the mansion. The brunette listened attentively to her interlocutor. She asked if there was anything else she should be wary of. Effie chuckled thoughtfully. She decided that it was better to tell her about it now. The circle of people who knew about the contract between the brunette and the young gentleman included only 6 people. However, in a few days that number will increase to 7. And that person will be her etiquette teacher, Madame Flavia. This woman was strict. At the same time, Madame had better competence. So it is necessary to listen to her carefully. The brunette answered with consent. The girl asked how she should greet Madame when they first met. Effie realized that the girl was right. She should learn the Fornati greeting. The maid showed by her own example. Holding her skirt, she slightly bent her knees. It is necessary to keep the back straight. And bow the head. Adelaide, in a beautiful new dress, repeated after the woman. She held her skirt. She bowed slightly. She asked if she had done everything correctly. The maid was confused and surprised. She stared at the girl. She admitted that it was delightful. The brunette was catching on quickly. The candlelight dissolved the darkness of the late evening. The brunette was already in bed. Effie admitted that the girl had tried hard today. She wished that the sea goddess would protect the lady's sleep. The door creaked softly. The maid left the room, leaving the young mistress alone. Tall columns supported the ceiling of the luxurious bedroom. A bluish light flooded the carved furniture. A massive bed sank into the semi-darkness of the spacious room. The brunette was lying in bed. Her eyes were open. It was so quiet around Adelaide. The girl closed her eyes. The terrible moments she had experienced came back to her mind. She remembered the screams and noise that had been her constant companion in Camorra. She was glad that they had not reached here. A single tear rolled down the corner of Adelaide's eye. It turned out that there had been a world where it was so good and peaceful. You could eat hot food, sleep in silence. For some, it was a routine. In her sleep, the girl heard a splash. Someone was calling her name. The waves were beating and sparkling under the moonlight. The brunette was advised to run away. A scream in her sleep woke Adelaide. She opened her eyes in fear. She gasped for air. Suddenly the door opened sharply. An agitated maid ran into the room screaming, addressing the lady. The woman was in shock. She screamed that they were in trouble. She said that the girl needed to hurry. An elegant lady in a wide-brimmed hat decorated with flowers was already entering the estate gates. Madame Flavia had unexpectedly arrived at the mansion for a visit. Effie was panicking. They didn't have any time. She handed the girl a silk robe. First, she needed something to put on. The brunette was perplexed. She rubbed her sleepy eyes in shock. She asked what had happened early in the morning. The door swung open with a loud bang. The maid turned sharply towards the sound. Adelaide froze, pulling the hem of her robe down over her chest. The sound of heels was getting closer. The tension was growing. Both women froze in fear. A strict, elegant lady entered the room with a displeased look. A noble ancient family that served Bonaparte for several generations. Laurendin. But, undoubtedly, Flavia Loredan was the loudest name in social circles. Firstly, she was known for her beauty and elegance, which made her look like a work of art. And secondly, the brunette jumped to her feet and looked at the door in shock. The maid stood at a distance. Madame Flavia started shouting from the doorway about the shamelessness that was happening. The woman leaned on her cane. She asked in a loud voice what kind of sight that was. The young lady held her robe. The girl did not understand what was happening. She shuddered from the sharp cry. Flavia Loredan was known for her stubborn nature and excessive severity in training young ladies. Adelaide apologized politely. She bowed her head slightly. She said she was in a hurry. The woman asked who had given her permission to speak. She measured the girl with a contemptuous look. And she had to teach this something. A simpleton who didn't even know manners. The brunette was silent, bowing her head. An anxious thought was beating in the young lady's eyes. What did this woman want from her? She herself forbade her to answer. Cesare suddenly appeared in the doorway. He leaned casually on the doorframe. He declared that if she had known etiquette, Madame would not have been invited. The brunette smiled charmingly. He admitted that he had never thought that Madame Flavia would dare to visit them so early. The etiquette teacher took off her hat. She came closer to Mr. Cesare. She asked if he would allow her to say something. The young man said that he would first greet the dear madam. He hugged her shoulders and kissed her on the cheek. The woman was embarrassed. She wanted to stop the gentleman. The brunette asked if she had slept well the night before. Madame replied that of course she had, but Cesare did not let her finish. He was glad of this news. The brunette admitted that he would be glad if the woman joined him for breakfast. He just doubted whether Madame would have the time. Of course, the teacher happily agreed. She said that if Mr. Cesare himself invited her, she was free at any moment. The young man thought about it. He thought that's how it is. He was very happy. It was simply wonderful. A slight smile appeared on the stern madame's face. It seemed she had guessed something. The woman grabbed her head. She noted that Mr. Cesare was, indeed, incredibly resourceful. The brunette would have liked it better if he had been called handsome. The young man grinned. Wasn't that the reason why ladies gave him their hearts? His gaze met Adelaide's. The young lady was tense. She didn't like everything that was happening in this room. The girl silently watched what was happening. Cesare told the brunette to get ready to take a bath. They would come later. Madame said that the gentleman should not say such things so carelessly. What will he do if this one hears and comes up with all sorts of nonsense? The brunette noted that it would be nice to find out this one's position personally. Cesare noticed that the girl's expression said that she would definitely not invent anything. He even felt hurt. Madame was angry. She screamed in rage. How did the girl even dare to raise her eyes? The etiquette teacher's face was distorted with anger. The woman's eyebrows drew together. Madame Flavia took a few steps toward the brunette. The homeless orphan stood before the etiquette teacher, feeling the weight of someone else's gaze. The air between them rang with tension, like a taut string. Suddenly, Madame made a sharp movement with her hand. She opened the hem of her robe. She exposed the young lady's shoulder. Adelaide gasped in fear. Flavia was stunned. She noticed ugly marks on the girl's skin. She wondered what the hell that was. The brunette pulled the robe over her shoulder. She felt very awkward. She replied that it was nothing serious. The bruises should soon disappear and there would be no blemish left. She said that this would definitely not be an obstacle to their plan. Mr. Cesare looked at the girl intently, without looking away. The teacher screamed that this scoundrel couldn't have come to them. After all, they didn't even know where she was hanging out. Not only could she have been beaten by poor drunks while she was selling her body, but she would also have been left with scars. Even among the lower classes, she is the bottom. People like her are lazy and have no inner core. Madame screamed. Even if the brunette were 100 years old, she wouldn't be able to even come close to looking like an aristocrat. The woman was sure that the brunette's intentions to participate in their plan were obvious. The tramp simply wanted to raise her status by using her body. The girl remembered all her offenders. Mr. Nino was shouting Abel. Did he really seem pathetic even in the eyes of the boy because of the money he had lost? How some angry customer hit her, called her a dirty rat, accused that she couldn't clean properly. How she got kicked in the leg because she couldn't pay off her debt for the previous week. Horrible memories flooded and swallowed the girl whole. The girl clutched the edges of her robe tightly and asked Madame for forgiveness. She admitted that she knew she was lacking in many ways, but she would try. Madame Flavia flared up. What kind of effort could there be? She looked at her interlocutor with disdain. I asked how the brunette had gone to such lengths to hide her true origins. Did the girl really think that she could deceive the eyes of those born and raised in high society? She asked a question, and where did the brunette even acquire such arrogance, vegetating at the bottom all her life? Adele did not raise her eyes to her interlocutor. She admitted that she grew up without parents and did not receive an education. Therefore, she could not know whether this was possible. However, she admitted that her brother thought she was capable of deceiving everyone, since he brought her here. Madame Flavia glared at her. Adele looked Madame in the eye boldly. If the woman thought her brother was mistaken in his judgment, why shouldn't she discuss it with him personally? The young lady said that she had never studied, and did not know whether her words had crossed the line of what was permitted. But she hoped that Madame Flavia would be able to forgive her. The teacher angrily clutched her cane in her hand. She couldn't find the words to answer. She could only mutter something discontentedly. Cesare grinned, watching the confrontation between the two, such different women. He pretended to cough. Madame Flavia blushed with anger. It seemed as if the etiquette teacher would burst into rage. The woman pulled herself together. In one movement, she put a wide-brimmed hat on her head. She turned away from the brunette. Madame Flavia was shaking slightly. She said that she had completely forgotten about the appointment. She informed Monsieur Cesare that it was time for her to go. The teacher walked past the brunette. She held her hat with one hand. The door slammed behind the angry madam. The young man grinned. He noticed that his little sister was no slouch. He was delighted with what was happening. The brunette thanked her interlocutor with restraint. She was still clutching the hem of her robe on her chest. She hoped that the man had not seen her bruises. Cesare noted that the girl did not have such an adaptive character. Oh, how difficult it will be for Madame Flavia. If the girl had been shorter, everything could have gone much more smoothly. And although you wouldn't say it right away, Madame was quite a sensitive person. The brunette flushed. Was the gentleman trying to say that she should pretend to be pathetic? Cesare chuckled. Why pretend? He thought the girl was pathetic anyway. The young man took a few steps towards Adele. He noted that she had been pathetic all her life. Was it strange that this fact had not changed even now? He stood in front of the girl and asked if maybe they should call what was happening a performance. He clarified that somehow the girl would be able to determine which action would be a reasonable choice without consequences. The brunette leaned towards the girl's face and asked what Adelaide thought about this. The young man smiled. The girl's reflection was visible in his pupil. The brunette understood that this was a provocation. Adele bowed low, asked for forgiveness, realized that this was another provocation or mockery to see her reaction once again. The brunette promised that she would do her best to live up to her brother's expectations. She thought that she had no intention of becoming someone's court jester. Mr. Cesare looked intently at the brunette. He turned sharply and left the room. I noticed that they all quickly ceased to be interesting. The girl, perplexed, looked after him. The next day, the brunette walked along the corridors of the estate after Effie. She wondered if Madame was serious about returning to teach her. The maid calmed the lady down. She asked the young lady not to worry. She hurried to open the door for them. The doors creaked open. The light from the crystal chandeliers filled the room. The brunette froze. Madame Flavia was waiting for her at the other end of the luxurious hall. Effie supported the brunette. She told him that if the young gentleman decided something, it had to be done without fail. Madame Flavia folded her arms across her chest. She held a long, thin pointer in her hand. The teacher's entire figure radiated discontent. Harsh words came out of her mouth. She called the girl by her full name as if she were spitting the words out. Adelaide. Bonaparte. The woman insisted that Bonaparte was not a name that someone like the brunette could bear. She waved her pointer. Madame was against the idea of the homeless tramp wearing the great blue star on her chest. She was sure that the sea goddess would be angry when she found out about it. The gentleman ordered the madam to turn Adelaide into a lady, but the woman decided to teach the brunette a different lesson. She flashed her eyes angrily. She ordered her to kneel. Adele was taken aback by what she heard. Was it really just her imagination? The girl stared at the teacher in confusion. Madame Flavia pointed at the girl. She screamed, was she deaf? She said, on your knees. The brunette froze. She didn't understand why the woman was taking out all her anger on her. Was it really only because the young lady was not of noble origin? Was it because she was a dirty shoe shiner? Did Madame really want to hurt the girl with such a relationship? The brunette lifted the hem of her dress, slowly sat down on the floor. In that case, Madame had chosen a completely inappropriate method. After all, there could be no honor in the knees of shoe shiners. The teacher froze. Clicking her heels, she approached the girl, praised her, raised the hem of her dress and placed her foot in her shoes on the girl's knees. Madame Flavia pressed hard on the brunette's knee, said that she was a commodity, and to be quietly sold to the Delevalle family was her only purpose. The old woman continued to press her shoe on the girl's foot. She noticed that if the brunette suddenly aimed at something more, she would go to feed the sharks. The etiquette teacher continued to hurt the girl with her heel. The brunette lowered her head. Her eyelids trembled. The woman pointed the pointer at Adelaide, said that was her place, asked if the brunette understood. She said yes. The woman stood on both feet. She ordered the girl to stand up. She said that it was time for them to start the lesson. First, they had to get their gait in order. Madame was swinging a pointer in her hands. Effie was walking toward them, carrying a box. The teacher said that in order to correct Adelaide's crooked gait, she would need shoes. The brunette looked dumbfounded at the pair of shoes lying in the box. From now on, she must wear only this pair, even when she is not in her classes. The girl touched the surface of the shoes with caution and trepidation. She noticed with admiration that these were her new shoes. With a quiet rustle, she took a pair out of the box. She put them on the floor. She tried to stick her foot in there. A flash of lightning pierced her head. The girl was horrified by the realization of what had happened. She turned to Madame. She wanted to say that the shoes were too small for her. They were pinching her terribly. The woman grinned unkindly. She made the young lady stand up more quickly. She folded her arms across her chest. Her face expressed satisfaction. The teacher made her student walk. She pointed with a pointer to the place where the girl should start. Then she waved her pointer towards the end of the huge hall and said that the brunette would have to go to the end. Flavia reveled in her power over the orphan. She said that the girl would have to keep going until Madame allowed her to stop. A long, drawn-out scream cut through the silence of the room. Hair flew through the air as the girl began to fall. The fragile figure ended up on the polished floor. Strands of hair were scattered across the smooth surface of the marble floor. Adelaide was shaking with indignation. A heavy silence hung in the air. Suddenly, the black shoes flew to the side. The girl angrily exclaimed that she could not do it anymore. The teacher looked sternly at the student. What was she allowing herself to do during the sacred lesson? There was absolutely no desire to study. Madame Flavia angrily shouted that the girl did not deserve to bear the name Bonaparte. She ordered her to get out of there. The woman was enjoying her power. Her evil eyes were shining with superiority. So she was going to shout and drive the dirty slut away. The steady sound of her heels beat out a steady rhythm on the marble floor. The folds of her blue dress flowed behind the brunette as she continued on her way. The teacher froze, listening to this clicking. This was not part of her plans. She narrowed her eyes angrily at her stubborn student. The brunette put on these unimaginably small shoes. They squeezed her feet mercilessly. But the girl had been walking back and forth for several hours without a break. Adelaide meekly asked Madame if she should do another lap. The girl concentrated and waited for the teacher's answer. Madame Flavia was furious. She had had enough. Because of her low origins, the brunette stubbornly carried out even the most stupid things. The woman was irritated. She turned around abruptly and asked Mrs. Effie to step outside for a moment. The maid bowed, asked for forgiveness. The young master ordered her not to leave the lady. Madame said that she would personally report this to Cesare. The teacher promised that she would not spank the girl. She swore on the name of Loredan. Effie thought for a moment, then said she understood. And soon the door closed behind her. Two figures stood frozen in the luxurious hall. Madame Flavia, straight as a string, exuded cold superiority. The brunette barely suppressed an internal tremor. The teacher turned to the shoeshine girl. She glanced sideways at her interlocutor. Madame Flavia admitted that she had decided to tell her directly. She recommended that the girl leave the mansion. Adele reminded that this was the intention of the gentleman who brought her here. Madame flared up. She noticed that she was talking to the girl now. Compared to the Bonapartes, the Delaval family is not such a chic match for marriage, and yet they were certainly superior to such a lazy, dim-witted person as she considered the girl to be. If the brunette understood her situation, then let her leave herself. Madame guaranteed her safety. promised to take care of the consolation payment. The girl thought about it. She wondered if this meant that Madame wanted her brother to tie the knot with Lucretia. The teacher raised an eyebrow. Surprise was visible in her eyes. Thin eyebrows darted to the bridge of her nose. The brunette continued. She thought that Madame had come here with the intention of fulfilling her brother's will. However, the girl noted that everything was completely different. She turned on her heels and apologized to Madame. She stated that she had to tell this fact to her brother. Fear and panic appeared in the woman's eyes. Madame cried out that such was the will of the mistress. She wished it. The treaty between Delaval and Bonaparte is an extremely old and now unfashionable story. However, if it were not for this contract, would Mr. Cesare have married? He is a man who is the object of countless women's attention. However, he still can't settle down and continues to behave like a little child. What would happen if such a noble line were to be broken? Madame declared that such a thing simply could not be allowed. The woman hoped that now the brunette realized that she was getting involved in a battle of the titans. Adele bowed her head low and thanked Madame for the warning. However, she still could not carry out her order. The brunette's amber eyes dropped down, avoiding Madame Flavia's piercing gaze. The woman's face was contorted with rage. Her thin eyebrows drew together over the bridge of her nose, and her tightly clenched teeth betrayed barely contained anger. She called the brunette a selfish creature. Was the tramp really going to bargain and beg for big money? The girl admitted that this was not so. The two figures frozen in confrontation seemed tiny under the vaulted ceiling. The air rang with unspoken words and barely contained emotions. The brunette remembered the variety of desserts, croissants and cakes. She admitted that she simply really liked the food here. Madame Flavia's face froze like a porcelain mask. Her eyes looked at the young lady in amazement. The girl agreed that, as Madame had said, money and the future were all luxuries for her. For those who struggled to get through each day, promises for the future were just a mirage. The brunette held out her hand. She explained that it was the thing the girl couldn't eat right now. Madame flared up. She shouted that the girl was also proud of the fact that she had hidden her mind away from hunger. Wasn't that the behavior of an animal? Adele did not argue. She agreed with her interlocutor. She said that she was right. The girl had no choice but to live like this. The brunette couldn't sleep from hunger, and there were times when she sat for a whole month on only barley bread. The girl admitted that she lived in uncertainty. She was only worried about whether she would be able to eat. Therefore, she could only answer Madame one thing. The girl made a curtsy and said that she asked for forgiveness. Although it was Madame Flavia's order, the girl had no intention of leaving the Bois de Boispart mansion. The girl left the hall, clicking her heels. The teacher was left standing alone. The woman was perplexed. It was a hell of a thing. I noticed that the brunette's movements were a little awkward, but even so she simply radiated tenderness and elegance. And she was wearing those shoes. The woman understood that such a thing was absolutely impossible. So why? Madame staggered, clutched her head. Flavia Loredan didn't understand why the hell her imagination still kept picturing the two of them together. Madame Flavia clutched her head, lost in a whirlpool of thoughts. Her fingers clutched at her hair. Fragments of thoughts and memories flashed through her mind. The woman had to find another way as soon as possible. A week of lessons with Madame Flavia had passed. The brunette didn't even have time to realize how one day had followed another. She walked thoughtfully along the path in the company of Effanie. Adele was aware of how quickly time was passing. Speech delivery, etiquette, small talk, rules for dealing with noble ladies of higher status, practicing politely refusing the advances of gentlemen. Soft light enveloped the girl's figure. Adelaide's long hair fluttered softly in the wind. The most terrible and painful thing was refining her gait. Her legs were in terrible condition. She was in constant pain. Mrs. Effanie asked the lady if her legs were okay. The girl mumbled that they were okay. The maid looked at the lady. She noted that it was indeed Madame Flavia, and she herself saw that her student's gait was already perfect. Moreover, the brunette's learning speed was simply stunning. While practicing perfect posture, the girl tried to hold a book on her head. When learning the intricacies of fan handling, it was enough to explain something to her just once, and she absorbed all the information like a sponge. Of course, practice was still required. However, even now, no one would have thought that the brunette belonged to the lower class. The girl hid her surprised face under a snow-white sun umbrella. She muttered, "So that's how it was." The two women stood frozen on the path, watching the lively group of girls near the carved gazebo. The wind carried snatches of their excited voices. Adelaide asked who these girls were. She did not recall seeing them before. The maid told her that they were members of the delegation from Orkanen. The brunette asked why they were in the mansion. Effie noticed that the lady was so busy with her studies that even the news did not reach her. A few days ago, the second prince ascended the throne. The sovereign's scarlet robe flowed down the marble steps. The golden crown shimmered in the rays of light. The opportunity to ascend to the throne came about thanks to the support of the young master Cesare. Since the prince had no supporters in the palace, it required a lot of effort from him. But in the end, everything worked out. In gratitude for his help, Emperor Orkanina generously rewarded the young master. So today it was extremely lively here. The brunette thought about it. To influence the succession to the throne in the neighboring country. Her brother's sphere of influence was much wider than she thought. The maid confirmed. Suddenly the group of girls perked up. Everyone turned in one direction. The guests noticed the Duke. The brunette came up and greeted her politely. The friends all started talking. They were looking for him. They were glad he was here. Mrs. Effie noticed that the young gentleman was there too. The girl was watching intently. She did not take her amber eyes off what was happening. Mr. Cesare was the darling of fate and the gods, the ladies' man of the Bonaparte family. The young man was surrounded by brightly dressed ladies. He was a man who was the blessing of the sea goddess. He was the one in whose honor such praises were sung. But for some reason Adelaide did not see any interest in him. He seemed rather empty to her. The brunette thought that this was hardly possible. Mrs. Effie thought it best for them to leave before they were noticed. Adelaide agreed with her maid. The women turned and headed in the other direction. The tall trees cast strange shadows. The two figures slowly moved away into the park. Cesare watched them closely. Soon the figures disappeared from his sight. Only the sun's rays broke through the lush crowns of green trees. One of the guests wondered if the Duke had noticed anything interesting. She looked in the same direction that Cesare's attention was drawn to. The young man muttered with displeasure that he thought there was a mermaid there. The blonde snorted incredulously. She looked out from behind Cesare and peered into the distance. Suddenly a man's hand covered her eyes. The brunette grinned and said that she was alone here too. The girl was embarrassed. She called the young man a joker. Cesare asked if she didn't like it. The brunette leaned towards the small ear of his interlocutor. He asked in a whisper if she would come to him today. He promised that he would wait. The girl closed her eyes and answered Mr. Cesaro. If the man promised to think about them in a more serious way, then she would visit him today. The brunette smiled. Judging by the conversation, it was time to let the blonde retire. And why was everyone trying to make a big deal out of a one-night stand? He touched the blonde's hair. He thought that this golden hair had seemed rather alluring to him before. The young man realized that this feeling had now gone somewhere. Before his eyes appeared Adelaide's blue-black hair under an elegant parasol. Mr. Cesare smiled at the blonde. He said that it was quite sweet and impudent. The girl stared at her interlocutor in shock. The young lady showed that she was offended and pouted. The young man turned away from his interlocutor. Suddenly the blonde changed her mind. She said that she agreed to come to him. Tears appeared in her eyes. Cesare replied that it would be better for her to go home. The dismissed lady was sobbing among her friends. Her sobs reached the ears of the young man. It was all one big bore. Cesare lit a match and brought it to the cigar. The flame instantly engulfed its tip. The brunette exhaled the aromatic smoke with pleasure. He continued walking along the path. Mr. Bonaparte stopped in the middle of the blooming park. He felt strange. After all, he had clearly seen her go in that direction. Suddenly he heard a scream. A woman's voice was asking someone to let her go. Cesare flinched and looked in the direction from which the screams were coming. At the fountain he saw an unsightly picture. The brunette froze, feeling rage boiling inside. Before his eyes, a man was squeezing Adelaide's hand. The brunette's amber eyes blazed with anger. Her face was distorted with rage. Her hand clenched into a fist. Every movement radiated resistance and determination. Let's go back a little bit. A young lady, accompanied by her maid, was slowly walking around the estate. The girl could barely walk along the shady alleys of the huge park, shuffling her wounded feet. Suddenly, the brunette tripped over a small stone that was lying in her path with the toe of her shoe. A sharp pain suddenly pierced her entire body. The girl opened her eyes in surprise. The light umbrella fell from her hands and flew away. Adelaide fell to her knees. A muffled cry of pain escaped her lips. The brunette's hair flew up and spread over her shoulders. The maid was worried about the lady's condition. Effie ran to the girl. She shouted that this would not do. She asked permission to check the condition of her legs right now. One shoe ended up in the hands of the maid. It slipped off the brunette's foot when she fell. The girl's feet were in a deplorable state. Her bare feet were covered in bruises and black eyes. Blisters were visible everywhere. The maid was shocked by what she saw. She froze in horror. A drop of sweat rolled down her temple. The woman shouted at the lady that it was too much. She said that she couldn't walk in those shoes anymore. Adelaide continued to sit on the ground. Tears were streaming down the brunette's face. She asked if the maid had any painkillers. Adelaide hoped that she would be able to endure the pain with the medicine. Effie sat down next to the young lady. The woman continued to hold one of the shoes in her hands. The maid thought about it. She clenched her teeth. She decided to end today's lesson here. She rose to her feet with determination. Adelaide remained sitting on the floor, leaning against the edge of the fountain. Effie decided to roll the wheelchair. The girl needed to cool her feet in the water for now. She looked at her reflection. The maid promised to return soon. The brunette sat on the edge of the fountain. She lowered her wounded legs into the water. She felt relief. It seemed that the pain was receding thanks to the cool water. The water lapped gently around the girl's limbs. Although it was not easy for her compared to Kimura's life, it was nothing. Loud laughter pulled the girl out of her sad thoughts. Someone was laughing uncontrollably behind her. The brunette tensed up. I heard men's voices. They were discussing Cesare and his upcoming party. The interlocutors thought that even for Bonaparte such a revelation was too much. Out of the corner of her eye, Adelaide noticed that they were noblemen. The girl became wary. She realized that the men were walking in her direction. The thought came to her mind that she needed to hide. The brunette picked up the hem of her long dress and got up from the edge. The girl decided to go around the fountain. The nobles were discussing the fact that Lucrezia was not seen among the ladies today. One of the men thought that she would become Cesare's partner. The second one shared the news. Mr. Della Valle told her to be calm. This news aroused interest. It was unclear whether they had not already decided everything. Adelaide walked around the fountain and hid behind a column. The young men were approaching. She could hear their voices through the murmur of the falling water. Crystal streams of water scattered around the fragile figure. Myriads of splashes sparkled like a scattering of precious stones, enveloping the girl in a shining veil. For a while the brunette heard nothing. Had they really gone? Adelaide decided to look out from behind the fountain's jets and see if she was safe. Out of nowhere, a young man suddenly appeared from behind her. The girl shuddered in fear. She tensed up. An unpleasant grin appeared on the man's face. The stranger asked who it was here. He grabbed the girl's hand sharply, pulled it towards himself, tried to attract the attention of his friends. He shouted for them to look in his direction. Some girl was hiding in the fountain. The man was holding Adelaide's hand tightly and pulling her towards him. The girl's injured legs let her down again. She slipped in the water and fell with a loud scream. Crystal splashes shot up into the air. A powerful stream of water doused the stranger. The girl, losing her balance, plunged into the cool waters of the fountain. A blonde friend made a remark to Henry. He thought he was going too far. The man made excuses. He said he did nothing. She fell herself. The brunette, coughing, began to climb out of the water. The girl was all wet. She was breathing heavily. Streams of water were running down her face and hair. The men froze in surprise. An obscene grin appeared on Henry's face. It looked like he had not found a girl but had caught a mermaid. I asked her who she was. Judging by her missing shoes, she didn't look like a noblewoman or a lady. The man leaned closer to the girl. He said that her clothes were too nice for a maid. The brunette didn't know what to answer. Henry frowned. He didn't like that the girl was silent. He said that it was possible to get it that way. He grabbed the girl's hand again. He thought that the girl was silent because that was what she had dreamed about. He tried to pull the brunette out of the fountain. The friend asked Henry to stop. He reminded him that they had been at the Bonaparte estate. The man tensed up after the blonde's words. Henry started shouting. So what? Was he supposed to think about Bonaparte even when he was touching some servant girl? He asked if this Bonaparte of theirs had already become a king. His friends tried to calm him down. They noticed that he was too agitated. The brunette reminded him of herself. She said that if the man pulled a little harder, it was quite possible that her hand would simply come off. The men froze. They looked at the girl in surprise. They didn't understand what was happening. The stranger spoke like an aristocrat. Adelaide tried to pull her hand out of the man's strong grip. She ordered him to let go. She warned him that otherwise he might regret it. Drops of water flowed down the girl's long hair and body. The wet fabric of her dress did not hide the charms of her figure. emphasizing her graceful and seductive lines. The three friends froze, watching this picture with delight and lust. Someone exhaled nervously. The nobleman's eyes gleamed with greed. What a thing! He wondered who she was. Henry supposed it might have been the governess. They suggested that with such rough hands she looked more like a prostitute who had sneaked in. They decided that the girl must have come to work. They laughed obscenely. They thought there were a lot of customers there. The men leaned over Adelaide. They giggled nastily. The brunette began to break free from the man's strong grip again. She asked him to let go. The girl did not have enough strength, but she was determined. Henry was rude. He wasn't going to let the prisoner go. He told her that she wouldn't get any human contact from that bastard Cesare anyway. The nobleman didn't even know what the girl expected when she got into the mansion. He asked her nicely to silently open her, but he didn't have time to finish the sentence. From somewhere they heard quick, confident steps. Duke Cesare Buonaparte approached them. The men's faces froze in tension, and their eyes darted to each other as they realized that their actions had attracted the attention of the owner of the estate. The three men stood guard by the majestic fountain. The conversation stopped. Only the measured splash of water broke the silence. The brunette stood motionless, watching the trio of hapless noblemen. He heard shouts. The men noticed and greeted Mr. Cesare. The young man feigned surprise. He asked if there were any like that here. He had heard of that bastard Cesare, but he couldn't remember Mr. Cesare. Asked Henry Fetch if that was true. The man seemed deaf. He clenched his teeth. He stared at his interlocutor. The brunette slowly approached the trio of nobles. He said that the head of the Fetch family would probably be able to enjoy this story. At his age, he had to run to and from Buonaparte's estate in the sweat of his brow, in order to try to borrow a few coins. Cesare approached the fountain. The young man narrowed his eyes. He continued that the head of the family had even dragged Madame Fetch along with him, hoping to appeal to his mercy. Henry Fetch's pupils narrowed to a small dot after the brunette's words. Indignant at what he heard, he loudly protested. The man rushed towards the Duke, called him a son of a bitch. His friends tried to restrain him, asked Henry to calm down. One of the unlucky trio asked Mr. Cesare to stop too. He said that the brunette had crossed all boundaries. The Duke's hand fell on Henry's shoulder. The brunette remarked that treating his younger sister like a prostitute was crossing the line. Mr. Cesare squeezed the shoulder of his sister's offender tightly. He was taller than his interlocutor. He looked down on the nobleman. Henry's mind exploded at the news. Could this woman really be Cesare's younger sister? The man could still feel the Duke's heavy hand squeezing his shoulder. All three froze in surprise and unexpectedness. The blonde screamed, asked to wait. What sister? What did that mean? The brunette, looking at the girl sitting in the water, confidently said that it was his sister. Her name is Adelaide. With a loud splash, the man stepped over the edge of the fountain. He raised a spray of water. He walked confidently through the water. He decisively took off his waistcoat. He covered the girl's shoulders with it. Adelaide was almost waist-deep in the cold water of the fountain. Looking intently at the brunette, Cesare asked how this could have happened. The girl looked at her brother in fear. Her amber eyes were captivating. A single drop slid down the brunette's cheek, leaving a glittering trail behind. The trio of hapless attackers froze in amazement. Their faces were distorted by a mixture of surprise and alarm. Every glance betrayed their inner tension. Adelaide stared at the brunette. She asked her brother why he was there. The young people continued to sit in the water. Henry, who was watching this, became furious. He shouted at them not to lie. Every fish in the sea knew that the Duke had no sister. Cesare frowned. Without turning his head, he said that indeed there wasn't any before. But now there was. Apparently his parents were still in perfect marital harmony. But should he explain? Henry shuddered, tensed. Clenching his fists, he shouted that it wasn't their fault anyway. Who would have recognized her as a lady looking at that look? The friends nodded, supporting the impudent fellow. They said she was sitting here barefoot and covered in wounds. Cesare looked at the girl. The brunette tried to hide her wounded feet from his gaze. The girl began to apologize. She admitted that she did not want to disgrace the name of Bonaparte and practiced tirelessly. She explained that this was why her legs were so badly damaged. She said that she had sent Effanie for help because she was having trouble walking. The girl didn't even think that such a disgusting situation could happen on Bonaparte's territory. Each of the three men shuddered at her words. Strong arms embraced the brunette, and the Duke lifted the girl into his arms. He asked her not to overdo it. And what kind of shame were they talking about anyway? He begged her not to torment herself to such an extent for the sake of something like this. Adelaide was worried that she could become a laughingstock in high society. She could harm the family. Cesare touched the girl's forehead with his lips. He said that there should be no such talk between family members. The girl was stunned by such behavior. Did he really say anything about family? The brunette had never heard anything like that in her entire life, even as a joke. Did all aristocrats really behave like that with their loved ones? I thought about how the daughter of a noble family would react to a warm relationship after experiencing stress. She reached her hand towards the man's face. Her hand trembled from the tension. The girl tenderly kissed the Duke on the cheek. She thanked her brother. Cesare laughed merrily. He easily held the girl in his arms. He said that there was no need to thank him. The nobles watched what was happening. They were surprised. Could she really be his sister? Some of them noticed that they even looked alike. The brunette smiled. He asked so if they wanted to have fun with his little sister. The three men froze in fear. They justified themselves by saying that they were only joking. Two friends said that they were trying to stop Henry. They did not know, however, that she was Cesare's younger sister. The brunette asked whether this meant that if she were not his younger sister, they would consider such a relationship quite acceptable. The friends did not think so. The Duke calmed the nobles down, told them not to worry so much. A sigh of relief escaped everyone. Was the brunette really going to forgive them? Cesare grinned, said that he too could accidentally torture someone, not knowing that they were members of their families, and hoped for their forgiveness. The Duke walked along the park alleys. Bright rays of sun broke through the thick crowns of trees. The brunette carried Adelaide in his arms. His steps were heard in the silence. The young people were silent. The proximity of the Duke excited the brunette. The girl averted her gaze from Cesare's face. She nervously clutched the fabric of the coat that was thrown over her shoulders. She did not like his close attention. The brunette noticed the girl's nervousness. He asked what was wrong with her. He asked if she was uncomfortable. Cesare asked to be patient for a little while. He noticed that they were almost there. He walked confidently towards his estate, carefully carrying the girl. The figures of two girls suddenly appeared among the trees. The friends watched silently from afar as the Duke carried an unknown girl in his arms. Entering the room, the gentleman put Adelaide on her feet. He held the girl so that she would not lose her balance. Suddenly everything changed. His eyes flared with anger. He glared at the girl and exclaimed why he had to do this goddamn thing. It was very quiet in the deserted room. The brunette did not understand what the young man meant. She apologized. Turning away from her interlocutor, she said that she would get off now. She began to slowly lower her wounded legs to the floor. A terrible pain pierced her entire body as soon as the girl touched the marble floor with her feet. She screamed loudly. The girl's legs buckled. The brunette immediately flew to the floor. The camisole fell on her from above like a black bird. Adelaide hit the floor painfully. The brunette watched her fall with indifference. He even laughed at her. He said that it was just a disaster. Towering over the girl, the Duke asked where Effie had gone. The brunette admitted that she could not walk and the maid went to get a wheelchair. Cesare said that this was not what they had agreed on. The Duke did not recall hiring a cripple who was not even able to walk normally. The girl was in pain. She couldn't get up on her feet. She apologized to the Duke. She admitted that she didn't think she would meet anyone. The brunette winced as a sharp pain shot through her. The pupils of her amber eyes widened. A man's shoed foot pressed hard on the girl's injured leg. He called her by name. He asked her what kind of fantasies she had. Did she really like having fun with a bunch of men? I asked if it was really a habit she had picked up from the slums. If she had the equipment, then anyone could get away with it. The man continued to press on the mutilated leg. The girl lay on the floor in front of him like a broken doll. The pressure was mounting. Cesare wondered if there were other circumstances that led to all the indecencies happening in Bonaparte's garden. Mr. Bonaparte towered over the unfortunate girl lying on the floor before him. He continued to deliberately hurt her. The girl was shaking from the pain that Cesare was causing her. She was overwhelmed by even more resentment. She asked again in surprise, was the brunette really trying to say that it was she who seduced those men? Cesare angrily replied that she knew better. The brunette tried to turn around and look the Duke in the eye. She said that it was not so. The interlocutor did not believe her. He asked again if she was sure of her words. The girl confirmed it. The young man exhaled sharply. He even bent in half. He laughed loudly. His laughter echoed off the walls of the room. The brunette looked at her interlocutor in bewilderment. After laughing, the young gentleman noticed that Madame Flavia had been rather harsh. The man continued to press his boot on the bare, wounded foot of the girl lying on the floor. I wondered if the brunette was really incapable of doing even one thing properly. For example, getting into verbal battles and losing shamefully, or get what she wants by fawning and flirting. I noticed that she had so many options in her arsenal. The girl moaned in pain and clenched her fists. Cesare noticed that she was especially good at casting aside her pride and pleading. Why didn't she use her skills and allow this to happen? The girl covered her mouth with her hand to keep from screaming in pain. She took a deep breath. She said that she was wrong. It all happened because of her carelessness. The brunette walked away from the girl, put his hands in his pockets, said that he was glad the girl knew. He advised to treat the wounds so that no flaws remained. He pushed the bloody leg with the toe of his boot. There was a trace of the tread of his shoe left there. The door to the room opened abruptly. The maid screamed when she saw the young master. The woman ran up to the Duke. She wanted to tell him about the lady. The Duke cut her off. If she wanted to explain, she could do it later. The young man, leaving, said that classes would be cancelled for 3 days and left the premises. The door slammed shut. Effie stood motionless at the feet of the unfortunate girl. She continued to lie on the floor, clenching her fists in hurt and rage. The aromatic smoke of a cigar hung in the air in Cesare's office. The young man sat at his desk, sorting through papers. The brunette carefully knocked off the ashes. He examined the dossier. The second son without the right to inherit the family. Just trash, incapable of being a separate entity. He was surprised that this worthless fellow was doing all sorts of obscenities in Bonaparte's garden. The Duke peered closely at the documents. They've completely lost their fear. The young man pushed back his chair with a loud sound. He stood up from the table. He understood that he had to see this matter through to the end. The door to the spacious balcony creaked open. A light breeze stirred the curtains. The brunette realized that the plan had already gone awry. Adelaide's identity had been revealed, meaning that it was no longer possible to choose another candidate for the role of his sister. Now he has to make a Bonaparte out of the shoe shiner at any cost. The young man thought about it. I remembered the morning picture. I thought it was definitely provocative. Damp emerald hair, like seaweed sparkling on the surface of the water. Skin as white as salt. Excessively lush breasts. I remembered the 3 nobles. I thought that those bastards would probably remember with lust what they saw today. Suddenly, the brunette shuddered at another picture. He remembered how the girl had tenderly kissed him on the cheek in gratitude for saving her. His brain was throwing up more and more images of that moment. He wondered if he himself had gotten a little excited at that moment. He grinned. Even if he took the bait, the game would be over the moment Ezra Della Valle saw her for the first time. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. The Duke suspected who might be visiting him. Without turning his head, he allowed them to enter. Madame Flavia, like a true aristocrat, floated into the office without losing her dignity. She gave the necessary welcoming speech. She wished the brunette the blessing of the goddess. The young gentleman continued to stand on the balcony and smoke a cigar. He was silent, looking sideways at the woman who had entered. The teacher stopped in the spacious office and froze, holding a magnificent posture. The young man changed his pose. He turned to face the woman. He turned to Madame Flavia Loredan shuddered. The woman did not know what to expect from her interlocutor. The young man admitted that he didn't particularly care how exactly she trained the despicable thing, but he would have preferred that Madame not try too hard. The woman breathed a sigh of relief. She asked for forgiveness. With a slight movement, she lowered her head, acknowledging the Duke's rightness. The brunette said so that she wouldn't bother him again. The teacher looked up. She opened her mouth, trying to object. The Duke noticed that Madame was a wise woman, so she should understand what he wanted to tell her. At this point, the audience ended. Madame left the room. The door creaked behind her. Flavia was furious. Her face was distorted with anger. She thought about that shoeshine girl. She admitted that she was not lacking in cunning. It was obvious to the woman that she had deliberately worn herself out until her feet were completely worn out. The teacher covered her face in horror. In this way, the woman could, ultimately, fall into disfavor with Bonaparte. She blamed the insidious scoundrel for everything. The women's voices rang with tension. The friends were discussing the appearance of Mr. Cesare's lover. There were rumors that she was barefoot. It was doubted that Mr. Cesare would have gotten involved with a common lady. It was assumed that his preferences could have changed. That was also possible. In any case, theirs was far from the most ordinary relationship. There were rumors that they entered the main wing together, and Mr. Cesare was much more affectionate than usual. They were surprised because Mr. Cesare under no circumstances allowed girls into the main wing. The red-haired girl jumped up from the bench in the gazebo. She was haunted by the question of who that unknown person was. She said that Genevieve wasn't feeling well, so she'd have to go home. Her friends laughed. They advised the girl to be careful. The redhead shouted for the sea goddess to protect them. The girlfriends were surprised. Everything was fine. Why did she suddenly feel bad? They accused her of pretending. The quick steps of the fiery-haired girl could be heard in the evening silence of the garden. Well. The girl needed to inform Lady Lucretia about this as soon as possible. The pen ran across the paper. The girl was writing a letter. That autumn in Fornati was in full swing, and the day when the house arrest would end was just around the corner. She said that the girl would be shocked. However, Genevieve could not help but inform her that a dark cloud hung over the lady's future. Today, from the stories of the ladies who gathered at the Bonaparte estate in order to admire the mermaid's heart, she learned the news. It reached her ears that Mr. Cesare had been caught with a girl in his arms, whom he had carried straight into the main wing of the mansion. How much longer does the Duke intend to stab her friend's heart with a knife to finally be satisfied? And what kind of shameless woman is this who lured him in? Genevieve wanted to meet the lady as soon as possible and give her some consolation. She ordered this letter to be sent to Della Valle immediately. Red-haired Genevieve handed the letter, sealed in a red envelope, to the manor's servant. The girl mentally hugged her friend. After some time, this message was already in the hands of the one to whom it was addressed. The girl read the information, not wanting to accept the essence. The brunette staggered at the news. The piece of paper fell from her hands and flew into the fireplace. The girl screamed. What kind of utter nonsense was contained in this letter? The sheet slowly sank into the flames burning in the fireplace. The narrative immediately burst into flames and was engulfed by the bright tongues of fire. The young lady Della Valle was furious. Was Master Cesare going to test her again? A furious fire flashed in the brunette's eyes. All the nobility discussed the latest news. Everyone was interested to know about that rumor. Allegedly, Mr. Cesare was hiding a woman in the main wing. 3 days ago, when the delegation from Orkanen arrived to demonstrate the mermaid's heart, someone saw him carefully carrying an unknown girl in his arms. Moreover, it was said that Henry Fetch paid in full for pestering Cesare's woman. They suspected that this was true. It was not for nothing that the Bonapartes demanded from the Fetch family the entire enormous sum of investments in the latter's business. Everyone was wondering who she was. Who was the mysterious girl that Cesare Bonaparte fell in love with? Madame Flavia moved forward rapidly. She had had enough. She refused to tolerate the shoe polisher any longer, who was tarnishing the honor of the Bonaparte family. The woman realized that she needed to get rid of this insidious, impudent shoeshiner as soon as possible. The teacher abruptly opened the doors, burst into the room and called out in a loud voice to Adelaide. The brunette greeted Flavia calmly. The girl wished her the blessing of the goddess. She looked magnificent. She asked if Madame was in good health. The woman stared at the student in shock. Only 3 days had passed. How had she managed to become so obviously prettier in such a short time? I noticed that the young lady's sunken cheeks began to round out. The wounds on her dirty body had practically disappeared. The girl reminded the teacher of the maiden from the legends who lured sailors. Adelaide called out to Madame and pulled her out of her reverie. The woman screamed. She had heard everything. She accused the brunette of appearing before the gentleman in a shameful state, barefoot and wet. The brunette was required to sit quietly in the mansion, and not run around the garden like a foal. Then this would not have happened. The girl winced at the accusations. Madame told her to walk to correct her gait. Why did the girl disfigure her legs like a complete idiot? Adelaide looked down. She muttered that she was asking for forgiveness. The teacher noticed that there was not a drop of sincerity in her apology. Suddenly, Effie intervened in their conversation. The woman apologized for interrupting Madame. She asked to put in a few words of her own. The teacher gave permission. She said only one word: forward. The maid thanked her restrainedly. Effie admitted that she was not as educated in matters of etiquette as Madame. However, in her opinion, the lady's gait now fully corresponded to the principles of bella figure. Of course, this was made possible by the first-class lessons from Madame. The maid bowed. I noticed that in that case, isn't it time for them to move on to the next stage of training so that the lady could learn even more useful skills? Madame glared at the girl, mentally called her a bad girl. She even managed to fool Effie, luring her over to her side with pity. The woman gnashed her teeth in anger. She remembered that Mr. Cesare was also watching everything. Madame realized that she had no other choice. She decided to take Miss Effie's opinion into account, but still her studies were not over yet. Flavia gripped the handle of her cane tightly. Until then, she had to find a way to throw out this shoeshine girl. Announced the start of the next lesson. Madame walked up the steps to the entrance of a luxurious mansion. Lights were burning in the windows. The luxurious building was surrounded by well-kept flower beds with a fountain. Madame Flavia walked down the corridor. The walls were decorated with paintings. The woman was angry. As a result, her student was incredibly diligent today. She noted that the girl was quick to grasp things. She was too different from other ladies, who at the slightest thing would go into hysterics or start arguing. Lady Loredan winced in pain. If she had noticed even a hint of laziness in the brunette's actions, she would have been able to find fault, but suddenly the woman stopped when she heard someone calling her name. There was a young lady standing behind Madame Flavia. The woman turned around and looked at the guest in surprise. It was Lady Lucretia. The girl bowed. She wished for the goddess's blessing. She noted that they had not seen each other for a long time. Madame chuckled. It was not for nothing that the girl was called the first beauty in high society, the ideal lady whom everyone looked up to. Lady Lucretia was pleased to note that her interlocutor was in good health. Madame asked what business she had come to the Bonaparte mansion for. The girl decided to pay a visit because all the cream of society had arrived there, and looking at the busyness of the servants, the young lady assumed that a lavish reception was planned for the delegates from Orkanen. Madame supported her in this assumption. After all, Mr. Cesare had strong ties to the Orkanen Empire. This time, he even helped the new emperor ascend to the throne. The girl asked if everything was all right with the duke. Since she had not come out for some time, they could not see each other. A blush touched the girl's tender cheeks. Her huge eyes looked at her interlocutor. She hoped that nothing had happened to the lord. Madame Flavia guessed that the young lady had heard the rumors. As a longtime admirer of Cesare, she was probably nervous about what had happened. The woman thought that since this story would be revealed anyway, she decided that it would be better to hint to Lucretia about the family connection between the two. Madame looked down. She noticed that the girl had apparently heard something. She wanted to admit who she was, but something stopped her. Madame froze. Two women stood opposite each other. Both were silent. They looked intently into each other's eyes. Lucretia didn't understand what was happening. She asked Madame Flavia if she had asked a tactless question. The woman thought, after all, if you think about it, it doesn't have to be her who can throw out the shoeshine girl. A sly smile appeared on Madame Flavia's face. The young lady watched the woman with a smile. She waited for an answer. Madame had already received one warning from Cesare, and she didn't know what would happen if she was caught again. But what if Lady Lucrezia came on the scene? Although the girl looked like an impeccably elegant lady, if she were an angel in the flesh, she certainly would not have been able to monopolize the place of Cesare's bride. Madame turned to Lady Lucretia and asked her to listen carefully to what she was about to tell her. The woman assumed a conspiratorial air. She said that, according to rumors, this woman was a blood relative of Bonaparte. The young lady guessed that this was the daughter of Madame Caterina and Monsieur Rohan. It turned out that she was simply mistaken. What should she do now? Her thoughts were interrupted by Madame Flavia. The girl shuddered when she heard that she had not been mistaken in everything. Madame admitted that Madame Adelaide was, quite certainly, a member of the Bonaparte family and the younger sister of Monsieur Cesare. I noticed that from the outside it was. But in reality, who could have known? She could have been a poor wanderer. Madame hinted that they couldn't just go and ask Mr. Rohan and Mrs. Caterina about this personally. The woman turned and put the hat on her head. She thought that if Lucretia was perceptive enough, she should have understood. The young lady thought about it. She smiled sincerely at Madame Flavia. She thanked her for her parting words. The violet eyes narrowed. The girl admitted that she always made sense of many things thanks to Lady Loredan.